Today is the first opportunity for the Oireachtas to discuss the report of the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality, and I want to begin my contribution by commending and thanking those citizens, 99 women and men and the Chair, who gave their time and their consideration to developing the 45 recommendations that have come from the Citizens' Assembly seeking to achieve greater gender equality in Ireland. And COVID-19 provided a very unexpected and unwelcome interruption to their work, but it's an absolute credit to the Chair, Catherine Day, and the team working with her for innovating and for allowing the work of the Citizens' Assembly to continue in a virtual format. And I think it's striking that in such a difficult time in our country's history, the members of the Citizens' Assembly made time in their lives and in their homes for this important work, working to create a more equal Ireland. And I believe that they have given us an example of citizenship at work, and one that we should all hope to emulate. And as much as we thank them, I think it's important also to thank the families of these 99 individuals and their chairs, because as we know, when things are done over Zoom or Skype, a room is out of play, and family have to, help to keep the dog quiet or look after the kids or whatever, so recognise the work of their families as well. I also want to particularly thank Catherine Day for her and taking on the role of chair in this process and leading the Citizens' Assembly so effectively in the face of the challenges that were thrown up by COVID-19. And as Minister with responsibility for gender equality, many of the recommendations relate to my work, but a good many other fall under the responsibility of a number of my ministerial colleagues, and I'll work with them to provide these with the necessary in-depth consideration. It's illustrative of the need for gender equality mainstreaming across society if we are truly to make a difference in gender equality. As the members of the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality themselves set out in their open letter to us in the Oireachtas, they stated, "We looked back into Ireland's history, we looked at present-day society, and we are now submitting to you a new view for a future Ireland where gender equality is the norm." They've set out a vision of how we can achieve gender equality based on their considerations, and it is now the responsibility of members of the Oireachtas to consider and to respond to those recommendations. Policy to promote gender equality in Ireland is a key component of the work of my department. The National Strategy for Women and Girls provides a framework for the whole of government approach to gender equality. That strategy was brought to a close this year, having been extended by a year in response to the impact of COVID-19, and work will begin to identify the future strategic path for gender equality in 2022. I want to move now to address some of the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly on gender equality, in particular those which fall under my own responsibility. The Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality makes three recommendations for amendment to the Constitution. The first is to amend Article 40.1 of the Constitution to refer explicitly to gender equality and non-discrimination. The second is to amend Article 41 of the Constitution so it would protect private and family life with the protection afforded to the family, not limited to the marital family. And third, to delete Article 41.2 of the Constitution and replace it with language that is not gender-specific and obliges the state to take reasonable measures to support care within the home and across the wider community. These three recommendations propose significant amendments to the Constitution, and they'll require careful consideration for their legal and policy implications. Across the House, I think we can all agree that there is language in the Constitution which does not reflect the country Ireland is today. The recommendations do not contain specific language proposals, and this will form part of what the government must have regard to. This is not an easy task, and it will take time. And I'm mindful that consideration of the question of Article 41.2 under the previous government did not identify language which could be used as a replacement clause to reflect the importance of care work in society. However, my officials are working with the Department of Taoiseach to find a way forward, and I'm particularly interested in hearing Deputy's views in our debate and our discussion here this afternoon in the context of what would be the suitable language to use in the Constitution to recognise the importance of care in the home, but also move away from the very gendered language that's contained within Article 41.2 at the moment. The Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality also makes a range of specific recommendations under the broad heading of care, some of which fall within the remit of my department. There are specific recommendations made on paid leave for parents. The provision of family leaves has gone through many advancements in recent years, with the extension of unpaid parental leave and the introduction of paid parents' leave, since providing flexibility and support to working parents trying to balance work and the important work of caring for their children. Earlier this year, I brought forward the Family Leaves and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2021, which further extended parents' leave to 5 weeks for each parent of a child under 2. And this leave is available to the parents of a child and their spouse or cohabitant to reflect the complexity of family life in Ireland. And as was announced in last week's budget, this leave will be extended to 7 weeks for each parent from mid-2022, and I look forward to implementing those provisions next July. And of course, the consequent benefit payment will also be extended for up to 7 weeks. And these developments provide a significant amount of leave available to families to care for their child in his or her earliest months. And the provisions of the EU Work-Life Balance Directive require 9 weeks of paid non-transferable leave for each parent by August 2024. And the provisions of this will be considered in the context of the Citizens' Assembly recommendations. Other recommendations focus on early learning and childcare, and I recognise that the provision of affordable, accessible and quality early learning and childcare services is a very important measure to address gender equality. Women are still overwhelmingly responsible for childcare, whether looking after their children themselves at home, organising childcare or working in the early learning and childcare sector. We need to reduce this burden on mothers by making it easier for families to access affordable, quality early learning and childcare which meets their needs. We also need to encourage parents to share their responsibility for this care. Recent developments in relation to family leaves, including paternity leave, parents' leave and parental leave, will go some way to address this. So too will the recent and the planned developments in early learning and childcare. The Citizens' Assembly has made a number of significant recommendations on this area. These are to move to a publicly funded, accessible and regulated model of quality, affordable early years and out of hours childcare over the next decade, increase the state share of GDP spent on childcare from the current 3.7% of GDP to at least 1% by no later than 2030, in line with the UNICEF target, address the specific needs of lone parents to incentivise and support them in accessing work or education, including provision of child and after-school care. I agree with the Assembly's recommendation that we need to take further steps towards a publicly funded, accessible and regulated model of quality, affordable early years and out-of-hours childcare over the next decade. We also need to increase state investment, and we also need to address the specific needs of lone parents. And work is underway in my department to do just this. First 5, the whole of government strategy for babies, young children and their families commits to doubling investment in early learning and childcare over the period 2019 to 2028, so that by 2028 investment in the sector will reach some €1 billion per year. This strategy also commits to developing a new funding model, which will be the key vehicle to ensure that this additional investment delivers for children, families and the state. An independently chaired expert group was convened in 2019 to lead on this work. The work of the group is informed by a significant programme of research delivered by a research partner, Frontier Economics. The expert group has also undertaken extensive consultation and engagement with stakeholders. The report, which reflects the 2 years of detailed planning, consultation and research that is being finalised and will be submitted in November. It informed my approach to Budget 2022. Budget 2022 has been recognised by advocates in the early learning and childcare sector as a historic and step change for the sector. Funding for early learning and childcare in 2022 will increase by €78 million to a total of €716 million next year. This funding will allow my department to continue the implementation of universal early childhood care and education programme for more than 100,000 children for the 2 years before they begin primary school, continue the implementation of the Access and Inclusion Model programme of supports that enables more than 5,000 children with a disability participate in the ECHE programme, continue the implementation of the National Childcare Scheme, which delivers universal and targeted subsidies of up to 80,000 children in line with their income and other circumstances. But critically, the additional investment for next year will also allow my department to extend the NCS universal subsidy of up to €1,170 per child per annum to all children under 15 from September 2022, benefiting up to 40,000 additional children. Remove the practice of deducting hours spent in preschool or school from the entitlement to NCS subsidised hours, benefiting an estimated 5,000 children from low-income families. And I know that's an issue that we've discussed regularly in this chamber, and it was a change I'm very pleased to be able to introduce. Introduce a new funding stream with an estimated total cost of €69 million in September 2022, with a full-year cost of over €200 million for approximately 4,700 early learning and childcare providers. Providers will be eligible for this new funding stream to help cover increased operating costs linked to quality improvement measures. This additional funding will support early learning and childcare providers to attract and retain staff, including degree-qualified staff, and will support the programme for government commitment to support the drawing up of an employment regulation order for up to 30,000 staff in the sector. And in return for this investment, a commitment will be sought from providers not to increase parents' fees. So for the first time next year, the state will have some control over the fees charged to parents by childcare providers. Budget 2022 will also allow for further enhancements to regulatory and quality supports for the implementation of the National Action Plan for Childminding, a new workforce development plan, and the registration and inspection system for the quality of early learning and childcare. In conclusion, First 5 commitments chime with the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly, and progress made on implementing First 5 is significant. Budget 2022 in particular marks the beginning of a transformative multi-annual investment programme for the early learning and childcare sector, making significant progress on the First 5 commitment to increase spending to €1 billion per year by 2028, and on efforts to improve access, affordability and quality of provision. The Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality also makes important recommendations on encouraging women in leadership, including the use of quotas. It is central to ensuring that our society responds to the challenges of gender equality, that women are encouraged and supported in joining political life and engaging in leadership. Targets are a feature of some ongoing existing gender equality measures, including the provisions of the Electoral Amendment Political Funding Act 2012, which link the state funding of political parties in the electoral acts to the achievement of a gender balance in candidate selection for Dáil general elections. To receive full state funding under the electoral acts, a qualified political party have to have at least 30% women candidates and at least 30% men candidates at the election. The legislation provides that this quota will rise to 40% in 2023, 7 years after the February 2016 general election. The government's long-standing target of 40% gender balance on state boards has had some success, having been met by approximately half of such boards, with the average representation of women among board members is over 40%. In business leadership, the Balance for Better Business Review Group is an independent business-led review group established by the Government of Ireland to improve gender balance in senior business leadership in Ireland. Balance for Better Business have set actionable and progressive targets for companies listed on Euronext Dublin and for private companies in Ireland to encourage them to address the gender balance issue on their boards and leadership teams as a matter of priority. The latest data from Balance for Better Business in March 2021 shows that the number of women on the boards of Ireland's top 20 listed companies has reached 30%, up from just 18% when the initiative was launched in 2018. Revised targets in its third report to be achieved by the end of 2023 include a target of 33% of female representation on boards of ISAC 20 listed companies and 25% for other listed companies. Targets of 30% female representation on boards of large Irish-owned private companies and 35% for leadership teams have also been set. The Citizens' Assembly also makes a series of recommendations around gender equality in pay and in the workplace. Gender equality in the workplace, and particularly pay, is also a feature of the National Strategy for Women and Girls. Earlier this year, the Oireachtas passed the Gender Pay Gap Information Act 2021, which will introduce gender pay gap reporting for the first time. This is one of the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly on gender equality. I look forward to bringing forward regulations on this by the end of the year and a structure to permit reporting to begin in the coming year. Having this information available to us about some of our largest employers will enable us to identify where the gender pay gap is most significant and will direct focused efforts to address the gender pay gap across different industries. I believe it will also be positive to employers, with those that can demonstrate gender pay equality within their organisation likely to be more attractive to prospective employees. The recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly on the gender equality principle in law and policy are particularly pertinent to the work of my department. The Equality and Gender Equality Policy Unit leads on the coordination of gender equality policy across government, including leading the National Strategy for Women and Girls and developing initiatives to address gender equality. As the National Strategy for Women and Girls will conclude this year, my department will lead on examining and developing a successor cross-government strategic policy on gender equality. And in developing a strategic approach, it's vital that we can measure the extent of inequality and how well our initiatives are working. The importance of gathering and being able to disaggregate data on the equality ground is recognised in the National Strategy for Women and Girls, and it requires all departments to identify knowledge gaps in relation to gender inequality and use this as a basis to drive improvements in the data infrastructure and analysis required to close that gaps. And I think that issue in terms of the lack of data is as pertinent in areas to do with race, in areas to do with disability, and in other areas where there's discrimination, as it is in the area of gender. And I know the Anti-Racism Committee are bringing forward similar recommendations in terms of the availability, the need for greater availability of data in relation to race, and that's something my department will be bringing forward. In line with an OECD recommendation to develop an equality data strategy, the CSO compiled a data audit in cooperation with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform to ascertain the availability of public service data that is disaggregated by equality dimensions. And a report on this audit was published in October 2020, and my officials are now examining the possibility of developing an equality data strategy with the Central Statistics Office. Gender budgeting across government is being developed under the leadership of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. 12 departments are now reporting equality budgeting metrics. Earlier this year, the government agreed to the establishment of an interdepartmental group for equality budgeting to facilitate the embedding of the initiatives across all government departments. This group will play a key role in guiding the continued progress of equality budgeting. I note also the specific recommendations on equality legislation, and these are timely in the context of the review of the Equality Acts, which has already begun in my department. And at the request of a number of NGOs, we've extended the time period for public consultation on the review of equality legislation, but I think that is a really significant initiative that we're taking on in our department. Our equality legislation has served us well, but it is 20 years since it was originally introduced, and now is the right time to ensure that it is fit for purpose and examine the 9 grounds and indeed consideration for additional grounds. And I know we've made some specific recommendations in the context of the gender ground as well. So in conclusion, Count Corla, I want to thank again the members of the Citizens' Assembly for taking the time at a very difficult period during COVID-19 to give such in-depth considerations to the issues that came before them. I want to particularly thank the Chair of the Committee, Catherine Day, for the Chair of the Assembly, Catherine Day, for steering them through and delivering to the Oireachtas 45 incredibly important recommendations. Some of these are of a level, as I discussed earlier on, at constitutional amendment, where we need to bring, I think, parties together to consider what is the best way, what is the best language we can use in our constitution to reflect these ideals. Some of the issues, some of the measures are being progressed within my department, and others my department will be outlining into the future how we will progress them in my department and across other government departments as well. So maybe just to conclude by referencing a line from the open letter sent by the members of the Citizens' Assembly to us in the Oireachtas, where they stated, "We urge you to match our commitment by accepting our recommendations and implementing them without delay to deliver gender equality for Ireland." And that's a challenge to all of us. It's certainly a challenge that myself, that this government and my department are up to take on board. And I look forward to working with deputies across the chamber in implementing these recommendations. Thank you.